Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on keeping track of New York City's children. My name is Alicia Murphy, and I am an Associate Executive Director at Citizens Committee for Children, or CCC. During this webinar, you will learn how CCC's new data tools that map risks and resources impacting New York City's 1.8 million children can help you in your reporting and research. With me this morning is Apoorv Mehrotra, CCC's Director of Research and Data Analysis. During today's webinar, we will briefly explain Keeping Track Online and then explore how you can use these new tools that we've launched this week. Throughout the webinar, you can send us any questions you may have using the Q&A tool located in a toolbar at the top left corner of your webinar screen. Please make sure that you click on Send to submit your question. We will respond to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. CCC is a 74-year-old nonprofit child advocacy organization whose mission is to ensure that every child is healthy, housed, educated, and safe. We collect and analyze data from a variety of government sources and make that information available free to the public through a biannual publication called Keeping Track of New York City's Children, an annual community risk ranking report, and through the Keeping Track Online tool, which is the focus of our webinar today. Through Keeping Track, we examine hundreds of indicators related to the well-being of children and families, and we look at the data at the city level, across the boroughs, and in each of the city's 59 community districts. Our goal in creating the new data tools on Keeping Track Online is to illustrate the needs of children throughout the city, to shine a light on the inequities experienced by children across race and ethnicity, and from one community to the next, and to make the case for policies, programs, and budget initiatives that improve outcomes. You can now map where children are facing the greatest number of risks to well-being. You can also explore the services, supports, and infrastructure that exist in a community to help address risk and improve child well-being. With these new tools, we are providing a more complete picture of the needs of children, as well as the opportunities to ensure that communities have access to the services and supports that help children thrive. I'm now going to turn the conversation over to Apoorv, who will provide an overview of Keeping Track Online and then walk through the new tools that can assist you in your reporting on issues related to children and families in New York City.
Good morning. I'm Apoorv Mehrotra, Director of Research and Data Analysis at CCC, and I'm going to be walking you through the main features of Keeping Track Online, including the two new tools we have just recently launched. I'll also leave some time at the end to answer any questions you might have. And I would also encourage you to contact us at any point in the future with questions you have on using these tools. So right now we're looking at the home page of Keeping Track Online, and we can see above the image of the child are key features that I'll be discussing here. We'll start with the Explore Data function. This is the feature that existed on the original Keeping Track website, and we have carried it over to the new site. If I click on Explore Data, I'm allowed to choose from hundreds of indicators related to child and family well-being. They are organized here by issue area. So if I click on economic conditions, for example, I will be able to select from a range of indicators related to poverty, income, employment, and more. When I click on child poverty, I'll be taken to a page showing child poverty across New York City's 59 community districts. Above the map, we see that I can look by race and ethnicity, by different geographies. I can look at the number or the rate. So for something like child poverty, I generally like to see the percentage. And I can also go back up to 10 years and see what this map would have looked like in, say, 2005, for example. To the right of the map, we see the trend line for New York City, and I can see a similar trend line by clicking on any community district. So here I can see the trend line for East Harlem, just as one example. Again, what we are seeing here is available for countless indicators, from pregnancy and infant health outcomes to standardized test proficiency rates to child welfare agency involvement, and much, much more. If I want to select a different indicator, I just click on Change Indicator here. Now I'm going to walk you through the new tools that we have just recently launched, and we'll start with our risk ranking feature. So I'll just scroll up and click on Rank Communities by Risk. For the last 2 years, we have published a community risk ranking, ranking all 59 community districts by their level of risk to child well-being. We do this by looking at 6 domains of well-being, which we can see here: economic security, housing, health, education, youth, and family and community. And for each domain, we look at 3 indicators to create an index by which we rank risk, both overall and for each of the 6 domains. So this really tells us where risks to child well-being concentrate and in which issue areas risks are most prevalent for all 59 community districts. For our online feature, we have backfilled the data to go back to 2009. We can see here on the map of overall risk where risks to child well-being concentrate. We can see the darkest shade of blue in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn. And you can also see where there are vast disparities in risk levels between districts that are geographically right next door to each other. Most notably, we see the Upper East Side as one of the lower risk communities. And just one subway stop away in East Harlem, we have one of our higher risk communities. We see that same story playing out in the individual domains as well, in Manhattan, but also notably quite often in Brooklyn as well. And we can also look at different issue areas. So if you're in your reporting, you're interested in looking at health outcomes, we can go to the health domain. And here we see that health risks tend to concentrate in this stretch from central Brooklyn to eastern Queens. Now this is interesting because we know that some of these neighborhoods in Queens are actually much lower risk in other domains like economic security. So let's click on these districts. By clicking on these districts, I have added them to the table below the map, which shows us data on the individual indicators that make up the health domain. And we can see that Howard Beach and Queens Village, the two Queens districts that are not particularly high risk in other domains, have infant mortality rates in babies born with low birth weight that are comparable to much lower income districts. If we want to explore that further, we can click here on the KT Online Indicator link to take a closer look at infant mortality in New York City. This takes us to the page we would see under the Explore Data function, so we can compare the infant mortality rate in those districts to New York City as a whole and examine trends over time, the same way we did before with child poverty. Now, as far as why some of these relatively low-risk districts are mirroring higher-risk districts along indicators like infant mortality, that's something we plan on exploring further. Now, I'll go back to the risk ranking page, and let's check out the youth domain. So I'll just click on youth here. And here we can look at the youth domain where we look at teen birth rate, teen idleness, that's the share of teens who are not in school and not in the labor force, sometimes referred to as disconnected youth, and youth unemployment. Now, one thing we can do with this tool is, if we're interested in seeing data on all of the highest risk districts, we can simply click here and the Add All function, and that will add all of the highest risk districts to the table below the map. Now, when we look at the table, one thing that jumps out to me is that the teen birth rate in Bedford Park, 40.6, is significantly higher than even the other high-risk districts in the youth domain. So if I click on the KT Online Indicator to get a little bit more context around this high teen birth rate, I'll once again be taken to the indicator page for teen birth rate as if we were in the Explore Data function. So I can see here that the teen birth rate in New York City is 20.8, so Bedford Park's teen birth rate is twice as high. And if I click on Bedford Park, I see that it has the highest teen birth rate in the city, and looking at the trend line, I see it doesn't share the consistent downward trend that we have below for New York City. In fact, when I select 2005, I see that Bedford Park has gone from having the 18th highest teen birth rate in 2005 to the highest teen birth rate in 2014. So once again, we would be very interested in further exploring what is going on with the teen birth rate in Bedford Park. Now I'll quickly walk you through the asset mapping feature. So again, I'm going to go to the top of the page and click on Map Community Resources to open up the asset mapping feature. You'll notice that we still have our risk ranking and domains here at the top, and that's because we are able to overlay assets on top of the risk ranking map, and we can actually map assets over the different indicators as well. On the right side of the screen, you can see the current list of assets that can be mapped, once again broken down by domains, and that list will continue to grow. So let's say you were working on a story focusing on rezoning and affordable housing development in a particular area. You can simply type in the search box below the map the area that you're interested in. So let's just do East New York as an example. So now I'm zoomed into East New York, and we can even zoom in a little further if we'd like. Right now I'm looking at banks because that's the default setting when we first go onto the page, but we can also add assets, other assets, to see the presence or absence of resources that you might think are important for areas where more housing is being developed. So we already have banks as our default. Let's go ahead and select traditional food retail, which would basically be large grocery stores. And let's go ahead and select youth services under the youth domain as well. And so now you'll see what areas of East New York have these assets and which areas do not. We could also look at subway stops, pre-K sites, and a range of other important assets. The asset mapping feature could also help explore things that we know to be issues in certain communities. So let's go back to Bedford Park, and we can actually map assets over the teen birth rate if we select the youth domain at the top and then teen birth rate in the dropdown. So I'm going to do that now. So I'm selecting the youth domain. And here in the dropdown, I can choose between either mapping over the youth risk ranking or any of the 3 indicators that make up the youth risk ranking. So I'll just select teen birth rate. And if I'm interested in Bedford Park specifically, I can go back down to the zoom to community function and start typing in Bedford Park. There it is. And now you'll see we're zoomed into Bedford Park. So since we're looking at teen birth rate, or if we're interested in teen birth rate, I'll go ahead and unselect banks and traditional food retail so we can get a sense of what youth services exist in the area, since that's something we might be interested in looking at an issue like teen birth rate. And we can see there's a relative sort of dearth of resources and youth services sort of in the central part of the Bedford Park Community District. And if I'm interested in the accessibility of these services, I can click here on subway stations to see how close or distant these services are from public transportation. And we do see for a large portion in the center of the district of Bedford Park, services are not available or not very accessible. So CCC could certainly explore or help explore these issues further, in many cases by examining additional data available through our tool. And we could also connect reporters to service providers in specific districts of interest. So with that, I will take any questions on the tools that we have covered today.
Okay, we have a handful of questions that have come in, so I'm going to pick out a few of them, but you could definitely feel free to keep your questions coming, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. One question I think to get us started is approximately how many different sources of information are analyzed to determine this information that you've gathered in the online tool?
So we really get this data from a real wide range of data sources. In terms of the data that exists for the individual indicators, we have data that we get from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey, several different city agencies, data that they make publicly available, as well as data that we request. The asset data, a lot of that comes from the New York City Department of City Planning, as well as from, again, the relevant city agencies. So there are really a whole slew of data sources that we use to inform these tools. For the individual indicators, you can actually get the source data on that individual indicator page. So for example, when I was on the child poverty page before, if you just scroll down to the bottom of the page, it'll tell you exactly what the source is for that data. And you can also get the source information for the asset mapping portions if you click on About Keeping Track at the top right of your page, and that'll give you a lot of information on data sources as well.
Okay, another question specific to when you were showing the asset mapping features, does the banking feature also show check cashing locations throughout the city?
No, not as of yet. That is something we could certainly explore adding. But for now, we found that the most reliable data was only for sort of FDIC insured institutions.
And then another question about using the mapping tool to find information on the availability of food markets in what are considered high-risk communities in the city.
So under food retail, we do have both traditional food retail, which again consists largely of sort of larger grocery stores, but we also do have farmers markets. So if I click here on farmers markets, you'll see that the map should populate the sort of purple icons that just showed up would be farmers markets, and it also shows whether or not they accept food stamps. In terms of other types of markets, that's something that we could sort of explore adding. But for the time being, we use some of the threshold established by the city's relatively recent report on food deserts in the city, which established a threshold of a certain sort of square footage to be included as a food retailer. And then we also included the farmers markets as well.
Great. A couple of questions from earlier on in the presentation. Somebody expressed appreciation for the racial and ethnic breakdown for certain CDs and wondered if it's possible to get a similar breakdown for age.
Sure. So while at the moment you can't actually map the assets over a breakdown in age, but we certainly could go to the Explore Data function here And under demographics, we could look at maps by age. So under child population, let's say we're interested specifically in the child population, we can get maps that show us the breakdown of these different age groups, either under 5 years, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and 15 to 17. And we can sort of see what the population is by community district for those different age groups, which we can see here.
Apoorv, this is a question I know we've given a little bit of thought to. What are the neighborhoods in the city where you have found the most unusual information, where they may seem to be low risk in one area but are unusually high in another?
Yeah, so that's something that we're sort of going to continue to explore. You know, this tool was just recently launched, and a lot of the work thus far that we've done has just gone into, you know, getting the tool online. So we're certainly very eager to sort of explore a lot of those types of examples. I think the health example that I went over previously is definitely one that really seems really interesting, where we have relatively low risk districts really showing some sort of, you know, higher risk in the health domain, and high infant mortality rates and high shares of babies being born with low birth weight. I think we see some similar things in the education and youth domain as well, where districts that are relatively low risk in economic security still seem to be a little bit higher risk than you would think in the youth domain. So that is something that we're definitely going to be looking to continue to explore, where these sort of anomalies lie, and things that we would sort of also additionally be willing to sort of work with either reporters or other stakeholders in terms of, you know, sort of analyzing those kinds of things.
Another question just came in. What issues that you report on with this tool and in your reports have you found to disproportionately impact children throughout the city?
That's a good question. You know, I think, you know, there's certain issue areas that we look at that are sort of a little bit more, you know, sort of tend to look at children and families and the community at large, because we know that what impacts families and communities also impacts children. You know, one thing that we sort of are keeping a close look on is the availability of subsidized childcare. I think that's something that sort of obviously impacts children and their families. And when we look at the tool, we do actually see a real sort of disproportionate sort of use of informal childcare options as opposed to the subsidized options that are available in centers across the city. So that's something that, you know, we sort of, again, want to sort of take a closer look at, and something that we advocate on to make sure that there's appropriate funding and capacity for quality subsidized childcare in more formal settings, as opposed to what we really see as a reliance on informal childcare.
Could you, this might be a little tricky, but can you please show the childcare options in one of the neighborhoods?
Sure. So, you know, what's interesting with the childcare options is that, you know, this is probably the one resource that we have where there are just so many sort of points on the map that a lot of times it can be a little overwhelming sort of seeing all those points, particularly when we get into the utilization of ACS issued vouchers, either for licensed care or for informal care. So, but we'll certainly give it a shot. So let's go ahead and focus in on a specific community. Let's, you know, I don't know if there was a community of interest for the person asking the question, but let's go ahead and look at Brownsville. And so here we're zoomed in on Brownsville. I've unselected our default asset so that the map is clear right now. And when we go to childcare, so I can do one of three things. I can just click on childcare here, and that would show us all three assets at the same time, the three types of childcare assets we have, which are the contracted care, the licensed but not contracted care, and informal care. Or I could click on these three individually. I'll go ahead and click on just childcare as a whole. The map is probably going to take a minute to populate because, again, this is sort of the one resource where really, because of all the informal care vouchers that are used, there are really going to be a lot of points on the map.
Can you just explain what you mean by informal care?
So informal care is typically care provided by friends, family members, and neighbors. So for low-income families, particularly those on public assistance, they can receive vouchers that can go towards paying for childcare, either at a licensed childcare facility or at an informal care site, which again would be someone who's registered with ACS, but might not meet sort of the education requirements and other credentials that licensed providers need to meet. But we do see that a lot of folks really do prefer sort of the convenience and the flexibility of informal care. So here again, we can see on the map, you know, because of that sort of informal usage that's so high, just a ton of points on the map. But this actually brings me to sort of a good something that I did want to show anyways, which is when we scroll down, we can actually then kind of make sense of those numbers by looking at these cards. Now, these cards basically tell us how many of a particular asset are in a community district. So since we're looking at childcare, now we had Murray Hill, Stuyvesant, and Hunts Point sort of selected as the default because they're the highest and lowest risk community districts in the domain that we're currently looking at, which I believe we're on the overall page right now. And since I had selected Brownsville, it's also showing me Brownsville. And that's the Brownsville Ocean Hill Community District. So here we can see we have 37, ACS contracted care, those are the early learn sites, but then we also see a real significant sort of reliance on informal care options. And if I wanted to sort of get a sort of cleaner look at the map and maybe just see where the contracted care sites are, I could just unclick on informal care, unclick on licensed non-contracted care, and once the map again sort of might take a minute to load, we can get a sort of cleaner look at where the ACS contracted early learn care sites, which we can do right here. But those cards, I do believe, are also very sort of helpful, particularly in instances where the map is sort of so populated that it's a little bit difficult to get a good counter to really make a lot of sense of what's happening on the map.
I'm sure you'll need a minute for this to reload, but there's also a question about, can you overlay with the child care assets the income or economic status of those families?
Sure, yeah. So one of the, I think the really neat things about this tool is that we can map assets over these different domains and the risk ranking map, but then we can also map the assets over the specific indicators that make up those domains. So if we're interested in income, we actually do have as one of the indicators that makes up the economic security risk ranking, median income for families with children. So if I wanted to take a look at the map overlaid over that particular indicator, I would just click on the economic security domain, and then in this drop down, I would click on median income for families with children. You can see that that legend above the map changed from lowest risk to highest risk to these income groups, with the darkest shades of blue representing the lowest incomes and the lighter shades of blue representing the highest incomes. And if I wanted to sort of get a sort of a better look at the city, I could do that by zooming out. And again, because I have the childcare selected, it might take a bit of time. But that's basically how you can map over a map showing income levels for the city.
And then there's also a question about, what about pre-K resources for young children? Is there information in the mapping tool that looks at the preschool options for children in the city and in the neighborhoods?
Yes. So now this is again under the education domain. In addition to childcare, we also have continuing education sites and DOE schools, traditional public schools and charter schools. But you can see here that we also have pre-K sites as well. So when I click on pre-K sites, here we see the map. Now you might be wondering why there are circles and numbers, and that's actually to sort of kind of mitigate against what sort of happens when you do have a lot of assets in a particular geographic area. When you're sort of zoomed out, you don't want to see just sort of a ton of dots everywhere. So these circles and these numbers are kind of showing us the general number of a particular asset in the general area. And as we zoom in further, these circles and numbers will turn into actual asset points, and then we can get information on those points. So now again, we're sort of looking at the Brownsville Ocean Hill Community District here, and these are all the pre-K sites. And if we hover over these asset points, this will give us some information on that particular asset, and the different information depending on what asset we're looking at. Here we can see it on the pre-K sites. We get a look at the capacity and whether or not the pre-K is being implemented or administered by a CBO or by a DOE school. So here we can see a public school with a pre-K capacity of 36 in Brownsville Ocean Hill. Here's a CBO with a capacity of 40, and so on.
And these pre-K programs are 4-year-old programs?
Correct.
Are there more specifics on the schools?
So the information on the schools, we can click on just either traditional public schools or charter schools or both. So if we want to get a sense of the DOE, just traditional public schools, again, we'll see in this area where the schools are located. If I zoom in a little bit more, I'll get the specific points. Here where we have these numbers, we can see this is where schools are sort of co-located, where you have multiple schools in the same geographic area. And basically with the schools, we get the name of the school and the grade served. That's the information we have on the schools for now. Again, the list of resources is going to be growing over time, and we might also sort of consider adding additional information on the resources that we do have.
We had a question earlier about the raw data and download image buttons.
Yes. So up at the top right of the screen, above where we have the domains, you can see we have a few different options. Here with the tweet, share, email, those are just three different ways you could share the information you're seeing on the screen. This raw data function will actually produce an Excel file that gives you the data that you're looking at, both the indicator data and the asset data, in an Excel file, and it'll let you sort of manipulate the data on your own if there are certain things you want to look at, and it might be easier for you to be able to sort of look at the raw data on your own. And the download image function will actually download a JPEG image of the map that you're looking at, so you could sort of take that and plug it into a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, or what have you.
Okay. And then we had a question earlier about the homeless services data, saying that it appears to stop at 2014, and when will you update? So do you want to explain?
Sure. So in terms of the data, we're really almost all of the data that we collect comes from sort of government sources and government and city agencies. So really, it's as soon as they make that data available, we'll be updating the site with the newest data. Now, of course, we also reach out to the agencies and request the data. But there is always going to be, some lag between, the year and when we get the data. So we're always sort of communicating with our partners in city government and with the Department of City Planning, who maintain the sort of facilities files and the relevant city agencies. We're always sort of, in discussions with them about when the new data is going to come out, and we're always keeping an eye out for new data. And as soon as it becomes available, we'll update the site.
Similar question about the 2014 data throughout the community risk ranking versus the data that's available on the other parts of the site. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So our community risk ranking data is reliant on 2014 data because that's the most recent year for which data is available for all of the indicators we look at. Now, for certain indicators, 2015 data is available, and that would be reflected when we look at those individual indicators under the Explore Data function. But with the risk ranking, we don't want a situation where we're using data for 2015 for certain indicators, but 2014 for other indicators, because that data is not currently available. Once all of the data for the community risk ranking indicators is available for 2015, then we'll update the community risk ranking. But we do want to keep the individual indicator data updated under the Explore Data function as soon as new data becomes available, and that's why there's data available for 2015 for many of the indicators.
Okay. We had one more question early on that was about explaining the location profiles.
Sure. So I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we have these sort of 4 features up here, and I certainly only went over the 3. Create location profiles is in case you know there is a specific community district that you're interested in. So I'll go ahead and click on Create Location Profiles, and then we can select a community district or another geography, and then select from any indicators that we're interested in looking at, and then we can get data on those indicators, including trends for whatever geographic location we've selected. So let's just say I'm going to select Astoria here, if I know that I'm only interested in Astoria and I don't necessarily want to look at the maps showing all the other districts, and then I can select all the indicators I might want to look at. So if I'm interested in, let's say, poverty, let's say I'm interested in some youth outcomes like teen birth rate, let's just say those are the only ones. This has already gone ahead and selected the different poverty breakdowns for me. So if I'm interested in those, I can either select or unselect those. And then at the bottom, if I just hit Create Profile, this will create a page that's showing me for Astoria, the indicators I've selected along with the trends over time. And again, as I mentioned before, for all the indicators, we do have the source information and the definition of the indicator, as well as any other additional notes that might be relevant. And so here we can see all the indicators I selected, poverty and the different sort of poverty breakdowns, as well as teen birth rate, going back for as many years as we have the data available for that specific location that I was interested in. So that's what you can do under the Create Location Profiles tab at the top of the page.
Thank you, Apoorv. So thank you everyone for participating in our webinar and exploring our new Keeping Track tools with us today. We hope you'll take some time to explore the site for yourself and think about how it can be useful for your reporting. And please feel free to reach out to CCC for additional information or if you have any questions. I can be reached at emurphy@cccnewyork.org, or 212-673-1800, extension 18. And that information is right in front of you on the screen now. Thanks so much.